I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, none other than Jimmy Song. Jimmy, thank you for joining us. How goes it?
It goes well. I just came back from El Salvador teaching some people there Bitcoin programming. So it's good to be back home and here with you guys. Of course, I had to come back in time
I appreciate you cutting your trip to El Salvador short just to grace us with your presence. How was it, man? We saw some pictures. You were down there with Max and Stacy, and talk to us a little bit first about just what does El Salvador feel like in a bear market?
Well, it's interesting because, and this was something that I was telling Max and Stacy. I was there 6 months ago. 6 months, things have changed. Like you can see things being built and stuff like that. There are like bike lanes there now, which weren't there before. They're like, yeah, they put this in last week. It looks really nice. Everything is brand new, going up, and things are building. And you can just sort of see in the country that there's um, a lot more energy, a lot more building. And it's what you would expect it to look like if it um, wasn't bogged down with different forms of oppression, I guess, whether it's the IMF or the M13 gains and stuff like that. So you can kind of see it. Um, as far as Bitcoin goes, there you can still pay for stuff in Bitcoin, and it's pretty cool. I think there were a lot of people that sort of expected it to become like a libertarian paradise overnight. It's not quite that fast, but I mean, it's becoming something pretty quickly. Um, I like being there. I was there to train some programmers because, as you know, we need more programmers, and El Salvador needs more programmers. Yeah, it's interesting because like you don't get to see the day to day, but when you visit, you can clearly see progress, and that's what I saw.
You know, we hear a lot around this conversation that the people who most need Bitcoin today can't, excuse me, can't afford these 80% drawdowns. You've been to El Salvador before. They're now dealing with, that 80% drawdown. I believe, don't quote me on this, but maybe it was around 40K when you were visiting. We're down in the low 20s right now. So even a 50% drawdown. Were there any concerns from El Salvadorians, or was it still like, this focus on let's continue to build this ecosystem and learn as much as we can while we can?
Well, it's I don't know if I'm the right person to ask because the people I tend to meet are very bullish on Bitcoin. So they're kind of going to be self-selected. But the people I taught were very enthusiastic about Bitcoin and so on. So I would say that as there's still a lot of enthusiasm for it, and there's a lot of people wanting to build. There's the government is still bullish on it and everything else. They're taking care of some other problems first, namely the gangs. I think they've arrested something like 40,000 gang members, and they're no longer sort of extorting money from like the pupusa vendor or whatever. And that's a very good thing. It's adding more money to people's pockets and getting rid of these sort of like extortionists slash rent seekers.
I think it's a very interesting thing that, a lot of Western news outlets will try to portray Bukele as this authoritarian leader when in fact it seems like it's just trying to combat corruption in his country. So remains to be seen how things pan out. Let's talk a little bit about just sort
Wait,
of.
wait. I do just want to jump in though. It's not necessarily that simple though, right? I mean, he also has said he is the world's coolest dictator, and I think there are a lot of authoritarian things that he is doing, and that he would very publicly say that he's doing. Um,
Mm.
I mean,
I think
I,
I think the
I don't know
by
if
the
they're like that authoritarian. I mean, putting gang members in prison is not authoritarian per se. That I mean, these are people that are going up to like the fruit vendor on the sidewalk and extorting them for half their profits for the day. And
and those people absolutely should be tried and figured out. I mean, I just will say that some of the videos that were coming out, like when that initially was happening, I'm again huge fan of El Salvador. The World Economic Forum is absolutely trying to completely screw them over, and uh, I think there's a lot of amazing stuff that Bukele is doing. But some of those videos that when they first came out around the gangs were seemed chilling. It was like everybody sort of like at their for being forced to crab walk and stuff, and it was weird.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna take like the worst videos and make it seem like that's the norm and stuff like that. And this is the IMF's playbook. There was a whole thing about Pegasus and the journalists and stuff like that. You haven't heard that story anymore, right? The reason why you haven't is because they found out that some of Bukele's government officials also had Pegasus installed on them. So it wasn't their government installing it. It's somebody else. We don't know who, but it's not Bukele who's doing it. But everyone sort of automatically assumed that it was Bukele, and oh, he's this dictator that's keeping tabs on journalists. Actually, we have no idea who's keeping tabs on the journalists, because it's not just them. It's like a bunch of Bukele's friends that have the stuff installed on them. So there's a lot of propaganda going around, and the IMF
Absolutely,
is motivated to make them look as bad as possible.
100%.
But that's not what I saw. And like, be careful about like the news that you hear outside of El Salvador, because most of the people that are pushing a particular narrative have an agenda. The Washington Post, New York Times, those places have a total agenda.
Absolutely.
And it's to influence DC and the lawmakers and keep this narrative of dictator alive, so that when they can, essentially keep exploiting because think about it, like El Salvador has been exploited significantly. Like
Yep.
like just some of the stuff that I learned, for example. They are only allowed to import beef from their free trade zone, which is like the Central American Free Trade Zone. I think it's El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, and one other country which I can't remember. But those are the only they have a free trade zone, and then but other than that, if they want to import beef, they have to do it from the U.S. So Argentinian beef is great. It's grass fed, it's delicious, and it's plentiful, and it's cheap. But they can't import it because they have this weird trade deal with the U.S. And the U.S. can have these like very unfair sort of rules around stuff like that,
Hmm.
and keep them continuing to be oppressed. And because of sort of like the relationship that it's able to enforce through the IMF loans and stuff like that, they're finally kind of getting out from under it. And that this is kind of what happens. I mean, I like the beef that I ate there because it was mostly from Nicaragua, but I would love to eat like Argentinian beef. That's like top
Yeah.
notch stuff, like why isn't that available? And that's not the only one. There's all sorts of stuff, particularly around fruit exports and stuff, which the U.S. totally takes advantage of. So, I mean,
Very true.
there's a reason why there's this narrative of Bukele is a dictator. I will tell you, though, that there are 6 million people in El Salvador. There are 3 million outside of El Salvador, most of them in the US. And Bukele has as high or higher approval rating among the diaspora than he does at home. So that
That is
tells you
interesting.
something.
Yeah.
That's not the case for, Raul Castro or, uh, Chavez or whoever, like it's that's a very, very different thing.
Absolutely.
I think also, and I don't want to go too into detail because I candidly, I'm admitting that, and maybe this will hold me accountable. I'm trying to do some research on a potential article, but
Mm.
there was a big narrative about 20 years ago that the president of Singapore was this authoritarian leader who ought not to be trusted and we shouldn't be doing business with them. And, if you had invested in Singapore and their growth 20 years ago, you would have made a very, very good bet. And I candidly think the IMF is running a very similar playbook against Bukele and El Salvador that fast forward in 10, 20, 30 years, people are going to be like, oh shit, El Salvador was a no brainer, just like doing an investment in Singapore now. I mean, at this point now, Singapore is almost overdone. So I do think that there's a big narrative. There's that chart that Bloomberg posted of the 19 next countries that could default on their debt after what we saw out of Sri Lanka. And top of the list is El Salvador. And I can't help but chuckle. I can't help but chuckle and think like, oh yeah, th-
What debt are they defaulting on though? That's the key difference. So if they default on the IMF debt, they actually can kind of afford to do that because then they can go and raise money using the volcano bonds. Um, and that may be the direction that they go in because IMF loans come with a lot of strings attached. You have to spend money a certain way. You can only put a certain percentage towards infrastructure, for example, and for whatever reason, a lot of the leaders in countries that take IMF loans end up embezzling it. I think it has something to do with the fact that it's money from foreigners, and they don't feel that bad about taking it from foreigners as opposed to their own people or something like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about stuff like that. It's what you can see on the ground is clearly that they are building, and you can see it, and it's like beautiful. I was commenting to Max and Stacy, like this hotel that we stayed at, that whole neighborhood. If you walk around, you couldn't tell the difference between that and like a suburb of the United States, or like LA or something like that. It's beautiful. Like it's well manicured. Like maybe the Chinese embassy has razor wire at the top, something like that. But other than that, like everything is like growing. And that's the best evidence I saw that whatever they're doing is working. Now, is it authoritarian? It really depends what you mean by that, because in a sense, the things that people complain most about are with respect to civil liberties. But I mean, like gangs that are extorting people, that's not really civil liberties. I mean, the things that usually the people in the U.S. are complaining about are related to like okay, well, these M13, gang members, they're not given, perfect due process or something like that. Rather than, okay, like these guys were like harassing all of these, street vendors and taking, half their wage every day, and now now they're able to keep their full wage. Like those are good things. Like if you want to call getting rid of criminals like authoritarian, it just seems kind of ridiculous to me.
well, to be honest, like it's beautiful when you put it like that. But Jimmy, let's think
Hmm.
about this for a second.
Hmm.
While these criminals are doing that to the individual citizens, how is that any different than the way the IMF is doing that to the country itself, with the way they're forcing them to hey, you have to pay us in this certain way and do these certain things, and if you don't, like we hold you by the balls.
Yeah, I mean it kind of is. It's just that there's no real recourse after that. There's no higher authority to appeal to, basically, and this is kind of the problem. Is the U.S. is the dominant. It's the equivalent of the Supreme Court or whatever. It's their decision. It's final, and that's it. And that's the situation we have. And it's going to take some time, but I think El Salvador is on its way to like actually like growing and doing some good things. And it'll be interesting to see if the other Central American countries follow, because I mean, certainly people in Guatemala are very interested. I'm sure people in Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, they're all watching. And if this volcano bond thing goes through, which who knows when it's going to happen, but I suspect somewhere around the 1 year anniversary, which is around September. Um, they're going to have cash without the IMF's assistance. In which case, then okay, now they can actually go build stuff without needing to stay strictly in the lane of the international monetary order.
Was there anything that this trip surprised you or stood out in comparison to the last time you went?
Well, I didn't stay very long. So I literally flew there Sunday and came back yesterday. So it was like, and 2 of those days I was just straight up teaching the whole time. So I didn't really get to go out or anything. But the the biggest things were mostly just kind of visual. Just um, yeah, things just look safer. I don't know. Like it looks more beautiful. Things are building. Those are the things that stood out to me. And I mean, granted, I stayed in like sort of like a posh area of San Salvador, but you can kind of see it everywhere. It's everything. Everyone is building. Everyone is doing more stuff because the bad guys are out. I don't know. And what the president there is doing is making a difference.
Now that you're back in America, how disappointed are you? How much do you just come back here like, God damn it, I'm back to the same old shit. Nothing changed.
Well, I'm optimistic because of Bitcoin. I mean, I wrote about this in the article this week. It's there, if you have Bitcoin, you have this like sort of hope, right? Because you're not on the rat race treadmill, whatever, and instead you have the space to think about life a little more deeply and try to um, accomplish something that's meaningful rather than, hey, let's just go after what everyone else is going after, which is essentially rent-seeking positions. And that's a good thing. I don't know. I'm not really disappointed per se ever with Bitcoin because the people that attack Bitcoin, it's pretty obvious to me that they are, affinity scammers or whatever. I don't need or want their approval in any way, shape, or form. The people in the fiat world, I don't want, need, or want their approval either. It's I feel like I have a different sort of mindset than a lot of other people because there's this thing called Bitcoin. I have savings, so I don't have to think about, okay, how can I make rent this month, or how do I make sure I'm progressing in my career in the next year that is in line with my colleagues or something like that. I don't have to do any of that. I can just continue to focus on the long term things. For me, that's bringing sound money to the world, and that's Bitcoin. I can think about, okay, well, how can I best achieve that? How do I influence things to go in that direction? Certainly, like training developers in El Salvador is a small step in that direction, but it's something that I can do um, that maybe not that many people can. So I like thinking about those things and building things for the long term. And I think a lot of other Bitcoiners are as well, and that's what gives me optimism is that at least in this community, I a lot of my friends in the Bitcoin community, like they're thinking, okay, how do I make sure that I leave a legacy so that like my Bitcoin turns into like a family that has generational wealth. My last name can be like the Rockefellers or something from 100 years ago. I mean, not like the corrupt parts, but just the fact that they're able to last and leave legacies and stuff like that. Um, those are things I think are more meaningful, and I don't know. It's not depressing to me, at least.
Fair, fair. I always just love going and seeing other cultures in other parts of the world and the country. Um, I digress, though. I think you, while you were in El Salvador, we were actually having this conversation. Um, yeah, we had it here on Bitcoin Magazine. I was like, did we have it on Bitcoin Magazine Live or Spaces? Where we talked about this idea of like, the narrative that was fed to my generation that your generation, the generation before you, P's generation, was feeding, saying like, you can be anything you want to be, and the idea of like dreams, and just how unfortunately everyone just wanted to be a fucking pro athlete or a fucking famous movie star or a TikTok star, and then lo and behold, I think it was James Lavish was quoted the other day, or no, it was Luke Groman saying that there were more people, more individual human beings drafted into the Major League Baseball's draft than graduated with a chemical engineering degree last year. Like that's how far we've kind of fallen, and I think that actually feeds into a little bit of what you talked about in your most recent piece, how replacing reality with fiat falsehoods destroys meaning, and just the idea of like where is our purpose coming from, and what is real from the figments of our imagination that we've created.
Yeah, and it was a fun piece for me to write because it sort of like conglomerated a lot of the other things that I'd been writing about, and I realized like a lot of the values that we get taught are not from family anymore as much as it is fiat education. So you're taught what to believe and how to behave and what's good and what's bad from school, right? Like you're told, okay, this is what being a good citizen means, rather than here's who you are as a member of this family. That used to be a much stronger part of your identity. It really has sort of like equalized and or diminished over the years, where people don't identify with their family so much as maybe the school that they graduated from, and that's more their identity, and it gives sort of like a flavor of what you might believe and so on. And it's very uniform, it's very conformist, it's very sort of statist, and emphasizing compliance to the state, something like that, rather than I think a family identity, which is way more based on loyalty and love and you know uh, family identity, if you will, which tend to be a lot stronger as an identity, because you first of all you share a lot of genes and stuff like that. So it's there's sort of like a biological component to your identity that's not necessarily there when you're graduating from a class. It's not like ideological as, or it could be, but like there's sort of like a physical biological component to your identity within family that's kind of missing in fiat education. And in our sort of like haste to make everything equal, we've kind of removed a lot of meaning, and it's been taken over by the fiat system to essentially make everyone like drones or something, like very compliant cogs in the fiat system. Um, that fiat companies and fiat politics, all of those sort of like are the versions of things that we're supposed to get meaning out of. And really, all three of those are very empty. They're mostly around compliance or rent seeking, or, getting artificially outraged or something like that. And those are not really good sources of meaning, because what's there today is gone tomorrow. They're all very short term, very high time preference things. Whereas family, community, religion, like those have actually created things that have lasted a very long time, and it's much easier to get meaning out of those because you're contributing something to something that's bigger than yourself, that isn't going away, right? Like that's a very important and thing for most people. And writing about it and seeing how it's related to all of these other things, it led down to like this idea of debasement, the idea that fiat money is debased money, and fiat meaning is debased meaning. Fiat education is debased education. Fiat companies are debased communities, and you know fiat philosophy is essentially debased religion. It's very it removes sort of like the meat or the the really valuable parts and leaves you with sort of like the husk or something. And that's what I think most people find so unsatisfying about modern life.
How much like, I don't mean to harp on this, but I have a big belief that the way our education system is designed, it's designed to create these thoughtless robots that just complete tasks at hand without really thinking through what needs to get done. How much do you attribute things like our public education system to feeding and perpetuating the fiat system to then grow into exactly this, like thoughtless people who just sort of do what they're told to do because that's what you've done your whole life?
Mm. Yeah, and it's actually even worse than what you say because it's not just about compliance to the state. It's giving you sort of like trinkets to go after. So, if you're in high school, what do you want to do? You want to get into a good college, maybe an Ivy League college, maybe Harvard, right? Like, and then once you get into Harvard, what do you want to do? Well, you want to get to the next thing. What's the next thing? Well, it's an investment banking job at Goldman Sachs, right at a college, or maybe you go to law school and try to get a position at a top tier law firm, or maybe you go to med school and get into a really prestigious residency program. And I mean, like it's not just like meaningless cogs in a wheel. It's cogs that appear meaningful, but once you achieve them, they, they really have very little meaning. And it's just sort of like this filtering mechanism, and it's based not on its intrinsic meaningfulness, but because of an artificial scarcity that is created by fiat money, right? Like we have very abundant money, so you have to have scarcity elsewhere, and it's in you know the number of doctors in the country, for example. I don't know if you know this, but the number of doctors that come in every year, so there's always like retirements and deaths and stuff like that. So a bunch of doctors go away from the market. The number of new doctors that come in, that's entirely controlled by the American Medical Association. They decide exactly how many new doctors that are going to be, and they represent the group of doctors that already exist. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to make sure that every doctor that comes in has, or that there isn't a saturation of extra doctors. Instead, there's just enough to cover everybody because they don't want any doctor to go out of business. Of course, that's like a horrible incentive because, in a sense, like if you have a bad doctor, like it's kind of hard to get rid of them, and there isn't as much competition. And we think about why healthcare is so messed up. That's part of it. It's if everybody got to be a doctor that wanted to be a doctor, this would be a very different market. But that's not the case. It's a monopoly controlled by a single entity. So you have this sort of like artificial scarcity created by the fiat system at all levels, whether it's college or fiat companies or these extraordinary like achievement things. And the ironic thing is like the people that get them feel so proud that they have, right? Like the PhD from Harvard or whatever, it's considered super prestigious or whatever. But like most of those are actually like the most rent seekiest of the rent seekiest. And like they probably have tremendous amounts of ability, but it's being channeled towards these fiat games rather than to the market with entrepreneurship and stuff. Like you have all this talent and you're gonna spend it like doing postdoc after postdoc and academia rather than like trying to invent something that might be useful to the market. Like this is why the fiat system is has been so draining to everything. It sucks the creativity and energy and life out of almost everything, including the very people that it's supposed to help. Through fiat education and fiat companies and fiat politics and everything else, just like demotivates them tremendously, puts the wrong incentives in front of them, and makes them play games that really people don't want to play, right? Politics, and I mean, if you're an academic, You're writing grant proposals all the time. You're spending like, many months writing a freaking grant proposal rather than doing the thing you love, which is, trying to figure out, expand the limits of human knowledge. This is, and if you're in a company, if you're a coder in a company, I can't tell you how many times I had to be in useless meetings, not getting to actually code or write software. It's arguing about what features we should have and whatever. I mean, this is what fiat things do. Is it sucks the life out of them.
You mean to tell me that staff meeting that could have very easily just have been a meeting or an email? That's a good use of your time, effort, and energy. I fucking used to hate that. I actually like sidetrack a little bit, but like in my fiat days and my fiat career, like it was honestly before COVID, attendance in the office was mandatory for 99% of jobs. And I remember once I became an agent and you now had access to your computer out of the office. I got my laptop set up to where, okay, now I can access like the softwares that we use in the office on my personal laptop. And there were a couple of days where I just got pulled into all these meetings on the other side of LA. And I was like, dude, I can either drive back into the office or I can just start working remotely. And my bosses signed off on it. And then there were days where I would just go home at 2 and I would just work from home. And the first day I just worked out of the office, I'm rolling calls with my assistant and it's like 4:30 and I'm like, wait, did we just finish everything for the day? And she was like, yeah, like at this point, you've actually made calls and done stuff that are supposed to be done next week. Like we're going ahead. And I'm like, see, this is what happens when I don't have everyone like swinging by the office, asking like, hey, like, how's Bitcoin doing? Or like, who should I start on my fantasy football team? It's like, fuck, I get so much more shit done when no one's around here trying to fucking talk to me. But apparently that didn't mesh well with the company culture and the environment. It was very much like a, hey, don't work hard, but don't work too hard to where you make everyone look bad. Fucking stupid ass, dumb ass. I'm still salty.
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of should be, because I mean that sort of sucks the life out of you, right? Like when you have these like political things that you have to deal with, it like drains all motivation from like your normal work, the actual productive work that you ought to be doing. And this is the fiat disease. It's because of the presence of the money printer, because of the Cantillon effects, politics just becomes way more important. And entire companies are sustained by sort of political maneuvering and so on. So I mean, think about like every airline. I wrote about that a while ago, but they've all gone bankrupt multiple times. The only reason they exist is because of government subsidies. But that's also why they're so poorly run and why we have all these delays. Like I flew back yesterday. We had a 3-hour delay, and the flight attendant told us what happened, and it was like one bureaucratic mess after another. It was delayed 3 hours because the plane that was supposed to get to San Salvador couldn't take off. And the reason why I couldn't take off from Miami was because the pilot's seat spring was broken, so they had to replace the entire seat. Now, I'm not a pilot, but I think you can fly with a spring, and maybe fix that overnight instead of like delaying everybody. But that's what they had to do. And then they found another issue. There was like a dent in one of the propellers, I get. Well, not the, it's a jet engine, so it's a metal part that had a dent, so they had to replace that. But that wasn't the problem. I mean, they should do that, of course. The problem was that they filled out the paperwork on how they completed it incorrectly, so that caused another hour delay. Um, and then at that point, the pilot had worked some like 15 hours in a row. So there's like some regulation that says you can't work more than 17, and the flight would have taken 2 hours. So like it would have gone over the limit. So they had to call in another pilot. That took an hour. And then there were flight attendant union rules, which said that you can't work so many hours in a row. And two of the flight attendants would have worked too many hours in a row, so they had to be flown back according to the union rules, and they had to get. So all of that took like 3 hours, and it wasted a whole bunch of time because of all the fiat regulation stuff, right? Like, and this sort of stuff is so typical of anything fiat related. It's all political. There are sort of like kind of weird rules that waste a lot of time and things like that. And that's kind of what it comes to. It's a sad state, and it drains all meaning. It drains life. It drains like motivation. It's no wonder people are depressed. You get stuck in like sort of weird red tape, and you stay in sort of like you get into more and more of a Kafkaesque world. It's it gets very depressing.
Let, let's keep diving down these rabbit holes. Like you, you brought some sort of parallels to. I want to be careful how I say this before YouTube shuts down our account. Um, a European quote unquote power that came to be in the 30s into the 40s that was maybe the enemy of World War II, and draw some parallels to what they did, to what some of the decisions, not all of the decisions, just some of the decisions the US government is making. Can we unpack this a little bit and dissect that?
Just what I mean, essentially, what the U.S. is becoming is it's becoming more of a centrally planned economy, and we're going in that direction. And you know, typically this is called socialism, and this is from Karl Marx, who said that after capitalism there would be socialism, and after socialism there would be communism. And socialism is usually understood to be like the USSR or something like that, but actually there's that's just the leftist version of socialism. There's politically right versions of socialism, which a lot of people call fascism, but it's the same. It's uh, government control of corporations rather than like direct government control of everything, which is more the leftist version. And honestly, that was what Nazi Germany did. That's what a lot of other countries did. And U.S. tends to go more in that direction. You don't need to look much further than the healthcare system. There's a whole bureaucracy that is health insurance, and these are there's like six giant conglomerates that control most of it, and they're like sort of a tax that you have to pay if you want health care at all, or even if you don't need health care you still have to pay them. It's this very very strange system, and it's set up that way because it's a form of central planning, and that's unfortunately the direction that the US has been going in ever since 1971, or even before that, I guess the beginning of the Fed and so on. Used to be very much that each state could determine what they wanted to do. Now it's all so centrally controlled that, you know, um, like Caitlin Long has to sue you know, the Fed to get a banking license. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is what central plan economies look like. And the more I write these articles, the more I realize, like every one of these, it's like, okay, this is exactly what Soviet Russia did or communist China did, and they're spinning it as a good thing. It's just so strange because it's so obvious that it doesn't work, but we keep trying it.
How, like, on a scale to, just actually, I'll simplify it. On a scale of 1 to 10, like current laws and regulations in place in the US, how socialist are we? 10 being the leftist paradise of the USSR, and 1 being communist China. I
Wait,
don't know if that's
they're
actually a
both
fair
the
scale. That's not the right
the
scale.
both ends of the scale are like super socialist. So
You're right. You're right. I retract. 1 being the free market, pure capitalist market that we do not actually have. Sorry, did I put bias in that?
yeah. So I would probably put it at like 7. It's pretty controlled economy, and we don't have anything like the anarcho-capitalist libertarian paradise that I think would be a one or something like that. And we're not anywhere near it. Maybe like 1880s, 1890s, we were like four or five, three or four, somewhere around there. But right now, it's gone way more towards socialism. Yeah, and that's it's we're nowhere near that.
What what are things that you are keeping an eye on out of any government officials, whether it's federal, state level, or local, that would be a step towards that number 10?
Mm.
What are
Well,
what are like the when are Jimmy's warning flight lights and sounds going to go off?
yeah, universal basic income, universal health care, universal housing, a CBDC. Um, yeah, most thing, whatever you're getting for free, it's going to require a lot of coercion in order to get, right? So, um, if you have free healthcare, for example, or the government says you have a right to healthcare. Well, that means that somebody has to provide that service. How are you going to force them to provide it? Especially if you don't have enough labor. And this is what every country with like socialized medicine ends up being is they don't have enough doctors, or they're not paying them, or it's all centrally controlled. So the doctors are always like, "Hey, what the heck," and not getting paid enough. So they'll move to the US, ironically enough, because they could get paid more. Why would you stay in a country that's not paying you very well, and where you're essentially forced to work for a wage that's not really voluntary? Um, there's coercion involved whenever you're giving stuff out for free, and that's the other side of the equation that I think a lot of people don't realize. And the thing is, these things aren't free anyway. I don't know if you remember during COVID, but it was all these people that are not taking vaccinations, they should like we shouldn't let them into emergency rooms. We shouldn't treat any of their wounds, and we shouldn't give them any health care. It's like, yeah, this is exactly how free stuff becomes like a mode of compliance. Is if you don't do what we say, we're going to take stuff away that is supposed to be free. Um, and I don't know if I told this story on the show or not, but it's probably worth telling again. I was talking to Tae Young Ho, the North Korean defector, and I was asking him, "Hey, how did North Korea come into, or how did Kim Il Sung like consolidate all this power?" He said, "Just gave stuff away for free. That's what he did. At first it was healthcare, then a guaranteed job and housing, everything else, and he gave it all away for free. And of course, in order to build all that stuff, you had to draft everybody, and everyone became essentially a government employee. And at that point, it was okay. Well, you can have free housing, but you have to do what the regime says. And if you don't follow our rules, then we're going to take your house away. We're going to throw you into a prison camp or something." And that way lies tyranny. And if you're talking about stuff like universal basic income, well, it's clear who's benefiting, but who's hurting? Well, it's everybody else that gets diluted as a result of all that money that got printed, or the people that got taxed to pay for it. And that's where coercion comes in. You can't give away free stuff unless you take it from somebody else, or you coerce somebody else into providing that service. So that for me is the biggest indicator of the march towards uh, the communist socialist way of government. And that's not a happy place to be. And ask anyone that lived through communism. It's not good in any way, shape, or form. Um, so yeah, that would be my major indicators. But yeah, it's all it always comes with sort of like good sounding rhetoric. Don't you want healthcare for everybody? Don't you want everyone to have their own house? It's like, yeah, those are good things, but who's providing them? That's the thing. If Unless you can conjure it out of thin air, which you can't, you're either stealing from somebody or you're forcing somebody to do it. You can't do that. and you have to look at the other side of the equation. And if you're not taking that into account, then you might be a socialist.
I'm not feeling spicy enough to bite. but but I do want to touch on and maybe ask you just sort of, we had a long conversation with CK yesterday about this idea that, you know, Bitcoin succeeding it can either fully succeed or it will fail. Where it sits right now in this sort of like middle, maybe, along with all the other crypto bullshit, and gold is still being talked about, and then you have fiat just running rampant. It won't exist in this ecosystem forever, but it can really only exist in an ecosystem where it is the ultimate thing or it just fails utterly. I want to focus on the when it actually comes to coming into power. One of the things we talked about yesterday was this idea that in the fiat system, people hide so much wealth in their houses.
Mm.
And, the idea that he continued to push that I don't necessarily agree with is, the cost of housing will become much cheaper as a result of moving off of this fiat standard and moving on to a more Bitcoin oriented world. Do you agree with that type of sort of through line that, housing in general can become more affordable once we remove ourselves off of this fiat standard?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you really don't need to look further than like a place like Vancouver or New York or Toronto or something like that. Large number of those houses were bought by Chinese people that are trying to store their wealth. If you remove more that demand, that like store of value demand, and they're buying it because they don't think their cash is going to hold their value, whereas real estate is. If you remove that demand, then of course, like the price drops, right? And you probably don't have nearly the supply either, but like it'll be a lot more affordable. One of the things about real estate, though, that really rankles me is just how regulated it is, but at the same time, how sort of like cheaply everything is made. And this is something that I touched on in the fiat real estate piece. But so much of the real estate right now is like not built for permanently. I mean, it's you look at medieval stuff, it's a lot of that stuff has lasted because they built it out of stone. The homes that we live in, it's gonna last maybe 25 years, and then it's gonna be crushed because somebody wants like a newer designer thing. It's kind of like wasted work, right? Like if you can have a house that can last 100 years, all the rebuilding, all those materials and stuff can go towards something else and build something cooler. And we're not really like expanding technology or anything like that. I mean, maybe there's a little bit on the 3D printing side or whatever, but but because of this artificial demand of real estate, there's not really that much um, incentive to optimize things very much because everyone's making money. And this is the thing, like the analogy I'm going to give is like compare this to Bitcoin mining, where if you're an inefficient Bitcoin miner, you will go out of business. If you have to be like sort of hyper efficient and very, very good at what you do in order to survive. Uh, as a home builder, you don't actually need to be that great. Like you just because there's just so much demand, you could just sort of be like mediocre and still make tons of money. Um, there's not enough pressure to optimize or innovate or um, you know make things more efficient because the way that real estate is, it's heavily regulated, so you kind of have to build a certain way. And getting a permit, for example, to do like a 3D printed house is like going to be very, very difficult in almost every jurisdiction because the people in charge won't want it like that. There just isn't that much room for any of that because there's all this artificial money just sort of coming into real estate. So you know, all of that combined, and despite all that, homes have at least like building materials and technology. I mean, people live in like much more per person square footage than they were like 50 years ago because that's the thing that's most important to them. There is some innovation there. There could be a lot more innovation, I think, as you sort of optimize and put natural market forces toward it. And yeah, I think it'll get more affordable on two fronts. One, it'll be more affordable because there won't be the artificial store of value demand. But two, there's this uh, other sort of direction of innovation and better materials and things that last longer and things like that, which come as a result of a more Bitcoin standard. People are just not going to pay for crappy built houses. They're going to pay for the ones that are going to last a long time and that they can pass down to their children. And I think those are the two sort of like opposing forces that eventually make housing way more affordable than it is now. P, you're muted still.
Oh my god. Uh, thanks for letting me know. You're saying that basically, as we move closer to a Bitcoin standard, uh, there will be stronger incentive to use longer lasting building materials.
Yeah. I mean, not just like having longer lasting real estate, but also, just better construction techniques and stuff like that. So one interesting anecdote that I read about recently that struck me was towards the late Roman Empire. They wanted to build like new buildings, except like a lot of the knowledge on how to build those buildings like were lost. So what they ended up doing was taking parts from old buildings and making them again to make new buildings.
Oh shit.
Like because they just didn't, they kind of stopped innovating because of all the dilution and rent seeking and all that stuff.
Wow.
Like, doesn't it feel a little bit like we're going that direction, especially with something like airlines, right? Like airplanes have not improved in 50 years, like at all. I mean, yeah, maybe you get Wi-Fi on board now, but
Yeah,
really
but that took
like
like decades. Wi-Fi had been
yeah.
around for like 10 years before they were like, all right, fine, maybe if you're lucky.
But the actual planes, they don't go faster. They don't have a larger capacity. They don't like it's the same technology, right? And it's we've lost a lot of, and we you alluded to this earlier with the petroleum engineers versus the number of people drafted into Major League Baseball. I mean, we're gonna start losing some of the innovative ideas, and like because there's so much of a brain drain into rent seeking careers. I mean,
Hmm.
most of them are going into Wall Street and being investment bankers instead of Lockheed Martin to improve, jet engines or to come up with a completely new design that's like much faster and runs on like a different kind of fuel or uranium or something. Like these are all possible. Just no one's we're just completely stagnant on those fronts because of fiat money. There's a and I imagine that's the case for housing as well. There are probably way better ways to do stuff. It's just the people that are build exactly what they know, and that's it. There isn't sort of like innovation going into that. You're not putting brains towards that. The brains are all going towards how do I get people to click a few more ads. That's what they're doing instead of how do I make this industrial material like last longer and easier and more moldable and easier to deploy and all that. Like those are things that would actually improve housing tremendously. But instead, all those brain cells are going towards how do I extract like a few more cents from this guy, from each viewer of this article, or how do I get them more addicted to porn so they'll pay us more money, or how do I, make this game more addictive so they'll buy all the trinkets that go along with it. Like that. This is what financialization does. It encourages this sort of like rent seeking behavior, which doesn't necessarily add very much. The things that would add a ton, like making a nuclear powered supersonic jet, or uh, you know, I don't know,
I
like
want that jet.
housing, or a 3D printed house that can go up in a few days and last for 100 years. Those are things that I think would be very useful, but very few people are working on them, relatively speaking. Most people would, a lot of those people are instead, you know, hawking altcoins, or, um, you know, being an investment banker, or I don't know, just very rent seeky positions that don't do anything. That's what they're focused on, and it's you know, it's ultimately kind of meaningless to go do those, but they pay well because fiat subsidizes them. So that's the state that we're in.
Interesting. Well, we're almost out of time. I feel like I mean, I agree with you on a lot of what you're saying. I feel like maybe you're painting with like slightly too broad of a brush around the categories of things that are like, like fiat
Uh,
incentivized. I feel like you know what? I was gonna ask you like a question that would have taken like 15 minutes to answer, but
what?
I I guess
You can
where do
do
you
that. It's
draw
fine.
where do you draw the line? Like, how are you determining what is sort of like rent seeking specifically because of a broken monetary system, which we clearly live in one, right? Versus things that are, um, I don't know, like things that are basically just market dynamics.
Mm.
Um, I'm kind of going the direction of like subsidized industries or industries, as you said, that are like bailed out constantly versus
Mhm.
non ones. But I don't know how to draw that distinction. I'm curious if you.
Yeah, and I've thought about this a lot, and I've come to the conclusion not a very easy or clear line that you can draw, because everything is interrelated. The reason why people want to play video games and watch porn all day is because their jobs are meaningless and don't contribute anything, and their moral character has been debased along with the money. Uh, and that in turn incentivizes more rent seeking sort of jobs where people are making stuff that don't contribute anything. So it's all sort of like interrelated, and it's hard to say exactly how much is exactly from fiat money, how much is just sort of like general moral character degradation from the degradation of money, and how much of it is just partisan politics, or other things, or the effects of technology, or whatever. I mean, all of it is related. I believe that character degrades along with the money. I believe that materials and everyday things that we use degrades along with the money, and everything else. So it's where do I don't really draw a line. I do know that fiat has at least something to do with all of these things, and if it's not completely responsible, it at least contributes to it significantly through sort of, at the very least, the high time preference behavior of everybody, which is the result of the money debasing so quickly. So, you know, all that is to say that, I just sort of do paint it with a broad brush, because I think it's going to hit more so than it doesn't. I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be happy for people to point out where I am. But the series of articles has all been about, okay, well, let's think about this. How does fiat money affect this thing? And you can almost trace everything back to it. It's kind of sad, but it really is sort of a root of all kinds of evil.
Yeah,
All right,
well
I think I've
said.
exited the matrix. I think I'm now back.
You're back. You've come back to us.
I talked too much about the Wachowski twins, and I got caught up in the matrix. But Jimmy, I do want to just I don't mean to like just go for the biggest story on Twitter, but we are a ratings driven show, and that's how P and I collect our sats. What was your initial gut punch reaction, or just did you laugh audibly loud when you heard about Elon Musk and Twitter selling their Bitcoin?
No, I mean, I didn't laugh or anything. It was like just sort of I think this was his move the whole time was whenever he would be in financial trouble, let's go and do this, right? Like and he expected Bitcoin to be going up in price so he'd look like a genius and people would be more forgiving of what happened, but he had to sell at a loss, so he looks a little bit more foolish now. I think this was his plan the whole time was to dampen the volatility. And in actuality, if you think about like Tesla's stock price versus Bitcoin, I think he actually made out better storing it in Bitcoin than in Tesla stock. So if you think of it that way, like the alternative, I guess, would have been to do like a buyback of the stock or something like that, which would have essentially been that. And it would have it probably would have gone worse. But yeah, I mean, he's one of those rent seekers. I think, like, if you think about it, he's gotten so many subsidies off of for his cars and stuff, and I mean, his company's not doing very well. Like they without that Bitcoin sale, they would have lost a lot of money. Of course, they also have a lot of money, but I mean, these are fiat companies. Like it's just kind of crazy. I did a calculation for Coinbase the other day, right? Like just trying to figure out like what their financial situation is, and I don't know, maybe this will get you ratings, but let's just do the math, right? They did an 18% layoff, and they gave some numbers. It was like 1,200 people, something like that. So that if you do the math, that means that they're left with about 5,000 people. 5,000 people in Silicon Valley. Now, let's just like estimate how much that's going to cost. Some of them are going to be call center people, but others are also going to be like principal engineers and stuff. So, I don't know, all with healthcare, 401k, stock grants, and options, and all that stuff. Let's just say that's about 200,000 per person. It's about $1 billion a year just in personnel. $1 billion, right? And that doesn't include servers, regulatory stuff, advertising, you know, all the software licenses you have to pay, all the buildings that you're renting, all the perks that you're giving to your engineers, including the cafeteria food and whatever. It doesn't include any of that. So, and you include all that, it's like, huh, yeah, I can see why they're probably going to be more compliant with the state going forward because they have $6 billion, but like they have a huge personnel cost. They have a lot of other costs. They've probably taken out loans and things like that. Like I think we're kind of seeing a company turn into a fiat company in real time, and like they're starting. There was a story earlier today about somebody doing insider trading. I will bet you anything that this person will be punished like crazy, and they will put in all sorts of controls and do whatever the state tells them because they're they they're gonna need it. They need to comply with the state in order to have a chance at staying relevant. And this is the fate of every fiat company. Is in a sense like Coinbase was, 2013. They were like the only place reasonable place that you could go buy Bitcoin, and Brian Armstrong at that time was a Bitcoin enthusiast and stuff. He's since like sort of slowly gone down the altcoin route. And now they're probably going to become like a very fiat company, but that's sort of like the evolution of things, and that's how things happen.
So one thing, I mean, I'll just say that the thing I'll push back on, Jimmy, is I don't think Tesla is just now becoming a fiat company. To your point, like
Yeah.
they
They were fiat when they hatched out of the egg, and by that I mean when long before Elon even purchased them.
they were forged in the fires of fiat hell. Like the only reason they've ever been profitable is because of the all ESG and all the carbon credits. And I brought this up at the beginning of the show, and this will be the final point I make before Jimmy, I give you the last word. This is exactly what happened in the Q3 2021 earnings reports when they came in at a fucking loss and they were selling carbon credits. And the only reason they were profitable and their earnings came in profitable was because they sold carbon credits in the same way that they would have had negative earnings this last quarter if they didn't sell Bitcoin. So the fiat company can be damned to hell for all I care. But Jimmy, final word.
Well, my final word today is, hey, like it is kind of like a weird time in our space right now because for whatever reason, Ethereum is pumping, and I don't know. It always pains me when Ethereum pumps like this, and it almost drags Bitcoin along with it. It feels like it's an artificial pump. A normal pump looks like where Bitcoin leads everything else, and then things catch up later because you get people that are FOMOing or something like that. So it's a little weird. So something doesn't smell right in the market right now, and I'm not sure what it is, but we just sort of have to wait and see, which is basically the virtue of every holder. You're supposed to wait and see. You're supposed to have patience. You're supposed to not get affected so much by day-to-day news like Elon did this or Coinbase employee did this or whatever. The key to being a Bitcoiner, Bitcoin holder, is to sort of let that all wash over you. And there are sort of things that I think would bother you if you were more anxious about things. But if you've been saving in Bitcoin, you have some savings, you have a runway, you can relax, and you can start thinking about other stuff, like the long term, like what you're going to do 20 years from now, what sort of legacy you want to leave. And those are honestly way more interesting and meaningful questions for your life rather than is Bitcoin going to go up next week, which is what every show focuses on. And I get it. It's more fun to talk about that. But it's going to be more meaningful to talk about what you're going to do in 30 years. So I encourage you, all the you two and all the viewers that are watching this show, think about what's going to happen in 30 years and what sort of legacy you want to leave when at the end of your life.
As someone who is a host of a show that talks about what is the price of Bitcoin going to be next week, I could not agree with you more. That is you hit the nail on the head, Jimmy. The right question to ask is, where do we want to be in, at the very lowest, I would say a year, and more likely 30. Thank you so much for joining us, man. I always appreciate our chats.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.
Absolutely. Want to remind everyone one final time that tickets for Bitcoin Amsterdam are on sale. Prices go up in the near future. The censorship-resistant issue of Bitcoin Magazine is available in, I believe, Barnes & Noble, and is absolutely incredible. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's our best magazine yet. Really, really fantastic investigative journalism there. And that's all we got. We will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. We're going to be doing news and notes for 30 minutes, and then we're going to dive over to Twitter Spaces and have a conversation about Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, the insanity of the Bitcoin space right now. And we're going to be having that conversation with none other than Shinobi. So it'll be a fantastic time.
I'm gonna piss Shinobi off, but then also I'm definitely gonna piss George off and say ticket prices are literally going up. They're negotiating right now. How do I say this? It's going to go up so much that the 10% discount code to use BM Live will not make the tickets cheaper than what they are today. I'll leave you with that, my friends. So lock them in.
First time hearing about it.
Lock them in. They're going up. It's not going to be cheap. Come party with us in Amsterdam.
Goodbye, my friends.
Jimmy, the score of the game last night was...
We'll do that next week.
All right.
You're the man, Jimmy. Thank you.
Adios, everyone. See you later.
Bye.